Imagine a boy who, every night, cried silently in his room while the house sank into darkness. Each tear that fell was a reflection of the fear and loneliness he felt. The housekeeper, who took care of him lovingly during the day, never heard his muffled sobs after she went to bed. What could be causing such suffering to such an innocent child? One day, his curiosity and desperation led him to uncover a hidden mystery in his father's room. This revelation changed everything, bringing to light secrets that explained his sleepless nights and showing that he was not alone in his pain. Prepare to connect deeply with this story, as it may shed light on solutions to pains you might also know. Pedro was an 8-year-old boy living in an old and imposing house in Canela, Rio Grande do Sul. The building, viewed from the outside, had a majestic air, but inside, it hid dark secrets that only Pedro seemed to sense. Every afternoon, the sunset would light up the window of his room, signaling the beginning of the night and bringing with it a sense of stillness and mystery. Dona Maria, the family's loving housekeeper, was Pedro's last link to the outside world before he delved into his sad thoughts. When she finally retired for the night, Pedro found himself alone in the vast silence of the house. His nighttime cries were an echo of the loneliness he felt, an echo that no one seemed to hear or understand. The reason behind Pedro's tears remained a mystery to everyone except him. His mother, Luisa, although kind and compassionate, was always busy with household chores and, primarily, worried about the fragile health of her husband, João Enrique. The latter, a reserved and distant man, spent most of his time locked away in his private study, a personal sanctuary where no one, not even his own family, was allowed to enter. Nights in Pedro's house followed a silent and ritualistic routine. After a dinner that was more a ceremony of presence than of conversation, everyone would sit at the table, with Pedro always in the middle, as if occupying a symbolic role of unity. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of cutlery and the fleeting glances exchanged between the three family members. After the meal, Dona Maria would take Pedro to get ready for bed, giving him a kiss on the forehead in hopes of dispelling his worries. But Pedro's persistent tears revealed a deeper torment. Since discovering the secret hidden in the dark heart of his father's study, the boy could not find peace. It was after Dona Maria retired to her own room that João Enrique's footsteps would echo through the halls, heading to his enigmatic refuge. Pedro, from his bed, would hear each step as if it were the beating of a drum announcing the mystery surrounding that forbidden place. With a vivid imagination that turned every shadow into a potential danger, Pedro was haunted by the unknown every night. What did his father do in that secret study? Why did he keep it so distant from everyone? These questions tormented the boy's mind, mingling with the fear he felt when the house surrendered to silence, as if it held secrets that did not want to be revealed. Let's imagine together a common night in the life of little Pedro, a curious 8-year-old boy. He was restless, full of questions about what his father, João Enrique, did late into the night in his study. Then on one of those nights, he made a brave decision to discover what was happening. Pedro, with light and silent steps, left his room. He moved very carefully to avoid being noticed. Arriving at his father's study, he peered through the keyhole. What he saw made his heart race in a way he had never felt before. On the other side of the door, Pedro saw his father sitting in his armchair, holding a mysterious box that emanated a faint, bluish glow. João Enrique stared at the box with a vacant, distant look, as if his body was there, but his mind was elsewhere. The scene was strange and frightening, especially for an 8-year-old boy. Pedro noticed something even stranger. The box was covered in runes and symbols he had never seen before. As the boy watched, mesmerized, his father began to repeat incomprehensible words. With each word, the blue light from the box grew more intense. Seeing his father with that lost look and the bluish light reflecting on his face was unsettling. Pedro tried to understand what was happening, but the more he thought, the more frightened he became. He wanted to run away and forget the eerie scene. With his heart racing, he hurried back to his room. The scene wouldn't leave his mind, and he felt increasingly disturbed. The next morning, Pedro was quiet and contemplative. Donna Maria, the housekeeper, noticed that he had wet the bed, something that hadn't happened in a long time. She knew there must be a reason for it. When she asked what had happened, Pedro refused to tell her, but begged her not to tell his parents. Donna Maria thought it over and decided to keep this information from Luisa and João Enrique, Pedro's parents. She knew they were usually very strict with the boy, and wetting the bed would likely result in a severe reprimand. And so, Pedro's life continued, with him trying to forget the terrifying scene he had witnessed that night. But the image of his father and the mysterious box never left his mind, leaving him increasingly curious and apprehensive about what was really happening in the house. Donna Maria was sure that something very strange was going on with Pedro, and she needed to find out what it was. Donna Maria was an older woman, full of beliefs, stories, and folk wisdom. She always believed that when someone was unwell, there was something spiritual behind it. Thus, when she saw something inexplicable, she sought answers in her old beliefs. She decided she needed to talk to Pedro to find out what was happening. At first, Pedro didn't want to say anything, but Donna Maria knew how to make a child talk. She had a special way of approaching, always affectionate and patient. One day, she asked Pedro to help her make fritters, the kind he loved. While they were in the kitchen, mixing the batter and frying the fritters, the boy accidentally revealed that he had spied on his father in the study. Donna Maria, with her keen eye, thought Pedro had gotten a scolding from his father, João Enrique. But that wasn't it. Pedro, with fear in his eyes, said that he managed to return to bed without being seen, but was so scared by what he saw that he didn't have the courage to get up and go to the bathroom. He ended up wetting the bed out of fear. Pedro asked Donna Maria not to tell his parents, and she promised to keep a secret. Curious and worried, Donna Maria asked the boy to tell her what had so disturbed him. Feeling he could trust her, Pedro began to recount the experience, still somewhat confused and frightened. He spoke about a strange box his father was holding and a bluish light that seemed otherworldly. As she listened to Pedro's story, Donna Maria felt the color drain from her face, her hands tremble, and her legs start to go weak. She thought, could it be what I'm thinking? Donna Maria was very scared. Pedro, noticing her fear, became even more terrified. Trying to calm him, she decided to tell an old story about a cursed artifact she had heard about when she was a child. Mrs. Maria recounted that, a long time ago, there was talk of a box filled with runes and symbols that had the power to control the mind of anyone who opened it. Anyone who looked inside the box would have their soul captured by the artifact. In no time, the person would start repeating words in an unknown language, and a vacant stare was a sign that the soul was no longer present. The mere thought that Pedro's father might be a victim of this malevolent magical box made the boy tremble with fear. Mrs. Maria continued explaining that no one knew exactly where the captured soul went or why this happened. The legend was full of mysteries and dangers. Just the idea that João Enrique, Pedro's father, might be in danger made the child's heart race. She tried to reassure him, saying that there was still hope and that they would find a way to resolve it. Pedro, with wide eyes, asked how they could save his father. Mrs. Maria, trying to be strong, said that they would need help and that they were not alone. She promised the boy that together they would find a solution, but he needed to be brave and trust her. Mrs. Maria and Pedro stayed there, in the kitchen, while the smell of the rain cake spread through the air. The situation was serious, but Mrs. Maria's love and determination gave Pedro a bit of comfort. They knew the journey would be difficult, but they were willing to face anything to save João Enrique. Every night, Pedro, a sweet little boy, cried softly in his room. His mother, Louis, heard her son's sobs from the other side of the door and tried to comfort him, but Pedro didn't want to tell her the truth. He was afraid. Louis even discussed her son's problems with her husband, João Enrique, but João seemed always lost in thought, as if he was no longer really there. He wandered around the house, muttering a few words, but it was as if his mind was somewhere else. Louis, tired of not getting answers from her husband, began to focus more and more on her work as a commercial assistant at an appliance company. She loved Joao and Pedro, but she was exhausted from the lack of communication between them. Sometimes, Louis thought that perhaps the best solution would be to divorce Joao and give Pedro a new life. The boy was clearly disturbed by something, and Louis was sure that his father's lack of attention was affecting him greatly. To her, it seemed that the only solution was separation. However, asking for a divorce was not easy. Louis deeply loved Joao and wondered how Pedro would cope with his parents' separation. So, before making any decision, she decided to take Pedro to a child psychologist. 2 days later, Louis and Pedro went to Dr. Mauricio's office, a psychologist who did everything to find out what was going on in the little boy's mind. Pedro remained firm, not wanting to reveal much, but he decided to test the psychologist. He asked Mauricio if he believed in magical boxes that trapped souls. Mauricio, trying to be rational, said that the human mind is capable of inventing fantastic stories to distract us from real problems. Pedro realized that the psychologist didn't believe him. If the doctor, whom his mother said could help him, didn't believe, then there was no reason to share anything more. That's how Pedro decided he would have to face the problem on his own. He knew it would require a lot of courage. That night, Pedro made a courageous decision. He would confront his father and save him from the magical box that was stealing him from his family. During dinner, Pedro noticed that Joao Enrique's dark circles had greatly increased in recent days. His father was clearly under the terrible influence of that magical box. Pedro knew it was time to put an end to it once and for all. After dinner, Pedro approached Joao and, with all the courage he could muster, spoke about the magic box. He told his father that he knew what was happening and wanted to help him. Joao, with tears in his eyes, looked at his son and, for the first time in a long while, seemed present. Pedro and Joao hugged each other tightly, feeling that together they could overcome anything. From that moment on, Pedro and Joao's relationship began to improve. With the help of Louis and Dr. Mauricio, they started working together to overcome their issues. Joao finally began to open up and face his fears. Pedro learned that sometimes we need to be very brave to help those we love. And so, the family began to heal one day at a time. As Dona Maria went upstairs to her room, Pedro heard his father's footsteps heading toward the office. The sound of the door closing was the signal Pedro had been waiting for. He gathered all the courage he had to go there, where his father always held that strange session with a box full of peculiar symbols. Joao Enrique, his father, had already warned the family that no one should enter the office while he was there. Pedro knew the door wouldn't be locked, as his father's word was the only key needed to keep everyone out. Standing in front of the office door, Pedro took a deep breath, placed his hand on the latch, and slowly opened it. He only cracked the door and, through the gap, saw his father holding the mysterious box once again. The office was dark, illuminated only by a blue light coming from the box. Joao Enrique was so focused on the box's contents that he didn't even notice his son watching him. The man repeated words Pedro didn't understand, which made the boy certain that Dona Maria was right. His father was performing some kind of strange ritual and needed to be saved. Without thinking twice, Pedro ran towards his father with all the courage he could muster and, with a leap, knocked the box to the ground. The impact startled Joao Enrique, who saw his son there and the box on the floor. The crash of the object falling instantly woke Louis. Alarmed, she jumped up, thinking something had happened to her son. Dona Maria, who was a heavy sleeper, didn't wake up from the noise. Recovering from the shock of Pedro's unexpected action, Joao Enrique asked, agitated, "Why did you do that?" Not understanding the scene unfolding before his eyes, he repeated the question with more emphasis, while a tear rolled down Pedro's face. Louis arrived at the office guided by the sound of Joao Enrique's voice. She was surprised to see the man standing in front of the son and something shattered on the floor. Looking closer, she realized the broken object was a computer, with the screen cracked from the impact. Besides the computer, there was a notebook cover with some strange applications. The situation was confusing for everyone. Joao Enrique, still not understanding, held Pedro by the shoulders and asked again, now with a calmer voice, "Why did you do that, son?" Pedro, crying, replied, I thought you were in danger. I thought you were doing some dangerous ritual and needed help." João Enrique looked at his son with a mix of sadness and understanding. He crouched to be at the boy's level and said, "Pedro, I was just working on a special project. There's nothing dangerous here. The blue light and the symbols are just part of a research I'm doing. You don't need to worry." Pedro wiped away his tears, still a bit confused, but relieved to know his father was not in danger. Louis, now calmer, looked at her husband and son and said, "Let's all go to bed. We can sort this out tomorrow calmly." Nodding his head, João Enrique agreed, took Pedro by the hand, and led him back to his room. They still had much to discuss, but that could wait until the next day. The next day, the family gathered in the living room to talk about what had happened. João Enrique explained in more detail about the project he was working on and why the box seemed so mysterious. Pedro, now calmer, apologized for the scare and promised not to enter the office without permission again. João Enrique smiled and hugged his son, saying, "It's okay, Pedro. I know you only wanted to protect me. Let's try to be more open about what we're doing so no one else has to worry." And so, the family moved forward, more united and understanding than ever. Once upon a time, a woman noticed something very strange. Her husband was using a laptop she had never seen before, and on top of that, the laptop cover was quite odd. She became curious, but soon remembered that the most important thing was to protect their son, Pedro, from the possible anger of his father. She imagined that her husband must have been very angry because Pedro had entered the office, a place he knew he wasn't supposed to go. Worse yet, it seemed that Pedro had knocked the laptop to the floor. Quickly, the woman ran to her son's side, expecting to find João Enrique, her husband, furious. But to her surprise, he was not angry. In fact, João Enrique seemed sad. He knelt down to Pedro's eye level and, with a calmness that had been rare lately, asked for the third time, "Why did you do that, Pedro?" Feeling safer with his mother's presence, Pedro finally answered, "To save you from the evil magic box." João Enrique was puzzled by the response and asked, "Why do you think this laptop is an evil magic box?" Pedro looked at the laptop lying on the floor and then realized it was indeed a computer. He bent down, picked up one of the runes that had fallen off the laptop cover, and handed it to his father, saying that those symbols were proof that the box was evil. João Enrique laughed sadly and explained that the runes were just decorations on the laptop cover. The mother, who had been silent until then, finally asked her husband whose laptop it was, as she had never seen it before. João Enrique realized he could no longer avoid the question. He then asked his wife and son to sit on the office sofa. With a deep sigh, João Enrique began to explain. He told them that a few months ago, he discovered he had a small tumor in his lung. His wife was shocked to learn that he had kept such a serious issue from her. João Enrique continued, explaining that he had been consulting with a renowned doctor who suggested an innovative treatment. He was undergoing radiation therapy, which was why he was so tired and losing hair, which he had said was baldness. To ease the tension, João Enrique made a joke about getting his hair back if everything went well, and his wife smiled, albeit involuntarily. He shared that the treatment was physically and emotionally draining, and that his doctor had recommended cognitive therapy with a psychologist. This psychologist had developed a hypnosis method to help João Enrique relax, and that was why he had the oddly covered laptop. It was part of the treatment. The psychologist lived far away, so the sessions were conducted online, which made the laptop very important. Pedro, upon hearing this, finally understood that the laptop was not an evil magic box, but a tool that was helping his father get better. And so, the family, united, promised to face all challenges together, with love and understanding. João Enrique, relieved to have finally told the truth, felt stronger, knowing he was not alone in this battle. That sunny afternoon, João Enrique and Louis arrived at the doctor's office, still reflecting on the morning's events. Sitting in the waiting room, João Enrique nervously held Louis's hand, while she offered him an encouraging smile. The doctor, Dr. Eduardo, a man with gray hair and a soothing voice, called them in. Sitting in front of the doctor, João Enrique took a deep breath before he began to explain. He recounted the incident with the laptop, how Pedro had been startled by the blue lights and ended up damaging the device. He explained how this borrowed equipment was crucial for his video therapy sessions, helping him cope with the emotional challenges arising from radiation treatment. Dr. Eduardo listened attentively, nodding occasionally to show his understanding. He then reassured João Enrique, assuring him that he would arrange for another laptop so that the sessions could continue without interruption. His understanding and support were a relief for João Enrique and Louis, who exchanged looks of mutual gratitude. Louis felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. Since João Enrique had started the treatment, she had felt torn between wanting to support him and struggling to fully understand what he was going through. Now, seeing how the therapy sessions were making a difference, she knew she had made the right choice by standing by him. Returning home that afternoon, the atmosphere among João Enrique, Louis, and Pedro was one of calm and unity. They sat together at the dinner table, chatting animatedly about what had happened during the day. It was a scene that had not been seen in the house for a long time. A family united, sharing moments of joy and overcoming challenges. In the following days, João Enrique and Louis faced the challenges of therapy together, with a new sense of confidence and solidarity. Pedro, now understanding better the importance of the laptop for his father's treatment, promised to take better care of the equipment from now on. With each therapy session, the family grew stronger, building a deeper and more resilient bond in the face of life's adversities. João Enrique was a renowned doctor, his office a maze of tests, diagnoses, and patients. Each day was a marathon of consultations and critical decision-making. But amidst this frenetic routine, there was Pedro, his bright-eyed son with a mind full of fantastic stories. One day, while João Enrique was reviewing test images, Pedro entered the office with a peculiar gleam in his eyes. He was holding his father's laptop cover, where he believed he had found loose magical runes. "Dad, look, these runes will help us," Pedro said, with a mix of innocence and determination. João Enrique smiled tenderly, patting his son's head, but his thoughts soon returned to the challenge before him, the lung tumor that stubbornly refused to yield to treatment. After yet another set of discouraging tests, João Enrique and his wife decided to level with Pedro. They sat with him in the living room, where the walls were adorned with family vacation photos and happy moments. Pedro, with a heavy heart, absorbed his parents' words about the imminent surgery his father would need to undergo. The grim reality of the situation weighed heavily on everyone present. Determined to help in some way, Pedro sought out Dona Maria, the elderly family maid. She was known for her wisdom and her beliefs in the supernatural. Sitting in the shade of the old oak tree in the garden, Pedro shared his concerns with Dona Maria, who listened attentively, her wrinkled face reflecting compassion. With a soft voice, she explained to Pedro about the runes and how they might offer hope beyond modern medicine. "We need to find and burn these runes, my dear. They have the power to help your father," she said, looking at Pedro with seriousness. Knowing he would need to act discreetly, Pedro waited for a moment when his father was busy in the office. As the afternoon fell, he and Dona Maria headed to the study, where the runes had mysteriously come loose from the laptop cover. Together, they searched every corner, following an invisible trail until they found all the lost runes. However, the momentary peace was shattered when João Enrique surprised them in the study. His first reaction was one of fury, but he held back upon remembering the promise made to his son. Instead of exploding in anger, João Enrique faced Dona Maria with a mix of frustration and resignation. "Dona Maria, I respect your beliefs, but I can't allow them to interfere with my professional life," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and concern. The incident culminated with Dona Maria accidentally dropping the notebook cover, a gesture that shattered the fragile balance. Pedro rushed to help her, feeling the weight of the conflict between his beloved housekeeper and his father. Dona Maria looked at João Enrique, her eyes pleading with remorse and a desperate desire to be understood. With a heavy heart, João Enrique made the difficult decision to dismiss Dona Maria. "I'm sorry, Dona Maria, but we can't continue like this," he said, his voice firm but laden with sadness. She agreed resignedly, knowing that her beliefs had jeopardized her position. In the end, Pedro and his family learned a valuable lesson about how personal beliefs can collide with pragmatic reality, but also about how love and family support are crucial during tough times. They understood that everyone deals with adversity in their own way, and that mutual respect is essential for maintaining family harmony. In that tense moment, the woman, carrying only the essentials, turned to Pedro, who was crying, believing he was to blame for what had happened. Moving her lips, she quietly said to the boy, "We need to burn those runes, Pedro." The boy knew he had to find a solution, despite being a child and not supposed to handle fire. He ran to tell his mother as soon as she got home. He explained everything that had happened. His mother was sad to hear that Dona Maria had been dismissed, but understood the difficult position his father was in. He had only asked the housekeeper not to create any more fantasies in Pedro's mind. Pedro looked at his mother, desperate, saying they needed to burn the runes before his father's surgery. Luisa told her son that burning a notebook ornament wouldn't help his father. What would cure João Enrique was the skill of the doctor and the operation he would have. The boy, with tearful eyes, understood this but felt he needed to do something to help. The only thing he could do was burn the runes. So, Luisa decided they would perform the ritual, but only when João Enrique was not at home. The next day, while João Enrique was out handling some issues, Luisa took the opportunity to burn the runes with her son. The ornaments burned quickly, and she felt she was helping her husband, even if secretly. Luisa promised Pedro that once João Enrique recovered, she would try to convince him to rehire Dona Maria. Until then, she would continue to pay her salary, so she wouldn't face hardship while looking for another job. She knew convincing João Enrique would be difficult, but it was worth trying. The following week, the surgery finally took place. After hours of anxious waiting, Luisa saw the doctor approaching with good news. The surgery was a success. João Enrique was recovering well. Louis was very worried about João Enrique. He had just undergone surgery to remove a large tumor, but something surprising happened. The doctor said the tumor had decreased significantly, almost mysteriously. This left everyone perplexed, even the doctor, who couldn't explain how this had happened. For João Enrique, this reduction in the tumor was crucial. It meant he had a better chance of recovering. The doctor had not been very confident before the surgery because removing such a large tumor was risky. But with this unexpected reduction, everything became a bit easier and less dangerous. Louis started thinking about the runes Dona Maria had mentioned. He didn't know if he believed in them, but maybe they had helped in some way. When João Enrique woke up from the surgery, he was completely different. Not only were his lungs better, but his mood had also improved. After a few weeks of recovery, João Enrique returned home. He wanted to find Dona Maria to apologize for being rude to her before. He also wanted to offer her job back if she wanted it. Louis hadn't told João Enrique that he had been secretly paying Dona Maria's salary and was already considering bringing her back. The next day, Louis went to Dona Maria's house. She didn't have a cell phone, so he had to go in person. When he arrived at the address she had left, Louis was confused because he didn't find the correct number. He knocked on the door of number 40, and a very friendly lady answered. The lady explained that many people had been looking for Dona Maria on that street, but always confused the number. Number 39 didn't exist, so people would end up knocking on her door. She invited Louis in for a coffee. She mentioned that in recent years, many people had come looking for Dona Maria, all saying that she had helped heal or resolve something important. Imagine a lady named Dona Maria, whose warm smile and serene gaze won over everyone who crossed her path. She had a special gift. She loved helping people with problems in their homes. Dona Maria spared no effort. She would go to these homes, often modest and simple, and with her calm presence and problem-solving skills, she left a trail of peace and solutions. After each visit, she would leave abruptly, convinced she had done all she could, leaving people amazed and somewhat confused, as they barely had time to thank her before she was gone. Lua, one of the people who received Dona Maria's help, could hardly believe her luck in having met her. To Lua, Dona Maria was like an angel sent to brighten her life. One day, while checking her bank account, Lua made a surprising discovery. The money she had given Donna Maria for her help had been mysteriously returned. This was unusual. Normally, people who help expect to be paid for their service. Donna Maria hadn't kept a single penny, leaving Lua intrigued and even more convinced that there was something magical about her. For Lua, more important than understanding the mystery of Donna Maria was seeing her family happy and united. Her husband Pedro, a man with a serene demeanor and thoughtful gaze, seemed resigned to Donna Maria's departure, but kept a deep secret. Pedro's story and that of his family was a living example of human strength, unconditional love, and courage to face life's challenges. Even without knowing Donna Maria's whereabouts, the family continued to reflect on her presence in their lives. One day, after returning from a peaceful stroll through the local park, Pedro, Lua, and João Enrique, their curious young son, found a plain brown envelope with no return address on their doorstep. Curious, they opened the envelope and found inside a handwritten letter with elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. "Dear Pedro, Lua, and João Enrique," the letter began. "My departure may have left many questions unanswered, but I want you to know how grateful I am for all the care and trust you placed in me. Each of you possesses incredible strength and a love that transcends any difficulty. Stay united and happy, for that is the greatest gift a family can have. My mission was to help those in need, and when I feel that my task is complete, it is time to move on to help others." The letter brought tears to Pedro and Lua's eyes, but also a sense of peace and hope. Donna Maria was like an angel who had passed through their lives, bringing light and love. With gratitude in their hearts, the family decided to move forward, knowing that wherever Donna Maria was, she would continue to spread her magic of love and healing. And if you enjoyed the story, the Universo Yin Palabras channel thanks you for your company. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below about what you thought of the story. See you next time.